Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's time for the C3 stream. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the masses. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday Night Teaching. Glad to have you here. I'm Pastor Andrew, one of the pastors at Christ Church. You guys got your eyes? No, Joe at least has his tea. I've got my tea. You guys ready for Tuesday Night Teaching and tea time? We got a lot of ground to cover today, guys. If you are joining us for the very first time, fabulous. Glad to have you here. Welcome. We are on week 8. We've been doing 8 weeks of Paul, and it's been great, right? It's been a great 8 weeks. But we've been doing 8 weeks of Paul, and I promised, got my water too warm for tea. I love it. Hi, Therese. How too warm? So you're just waiting for it to cool down? You're right. Not many people know this, guys, but you can actually burn your tea if it is too hot. Optimal temperature, if it just means you have to do herbal tea, Therese, right? Herbal tea you boil, black tea you boil, green tea 175 usually. If it's a Japanese tea, you actually want to be even cooler, 160. Didn't know your pastor was also a tea nerd, did you? That's right. I've got our herbal tonight. No caffeine. No caffeine. It's too late for caffeine. So, yeah, well, good. Grab your tea. Grab your decaf. Some of you are like, decaf's not real coffee. If that's you, grab your real coffee if you want. Sure, go for it. We got a lot of ground to cover. So, yeah, let's, it's a little caffeine. I'll just give a little pep to our step, So here's the deal. We've been doing this for 8 weeks, which is great. And we could even continue to go at the pace we've been going at. But in transparency, the staff reminded me that I am supposed to be on. I promised that I would be on to the next selection, guys. So we do need to be, we need to honor the timelines that I had originally kind of suggested we would be moving towards. And so we do have another series coming up. I don't have any of the curriculum with me, but it's Divine Drama. We're going to be starting that up, and I'm going to try to finish up tonight. Really am. We're going to move fast, and we're going to wrap up the story of Paul so that next week we can officially start Divine Drama. Divine Drama is going to be a long experience, okay? So once we get into Divine Drama, we're going to be in it for a while. It is a holistic walkthrough of the Bible. We're going to walk beginning to end through the biblical narrative, okay? We're going to look at big themes. There's going to be lots of pictures. I know you guys love pictures. I know pictures are big. Lots of visual aids, okay? There'll be pictures, there will be the Bible, and there will be tea to come, all right? So that's kicking off next week. I ran out of materials for those of you who did. I still have to get materials to just a handful of you. I've got it to most of you. But there's a handful of you that I have yet to get materials into your hands, but I do have them for those of you who are on that list. If you missed out, don't worry. It's not that big of a deal. I will be showing you on the screen all of the graphics, okay? So you don't need the companion book. You don't have to have it with you. But we'll start the next week, okay? That's our goal. Sound good? That's the goal. Next week, Divine Drama. Cool. All right, this week, let's hit it running, guys, because like I said, we got a lot of ground to cover. And so we are wrapping up with the Apostle Paul. Let me bring up my stuff for you so you can see. We're kind of picking up at there you go. So where we're picking up is in Acts. So if you do have a Bible, great. Grab your Bible. If you want to open another window, if you're watching on a laptop or something like that. If you're on YouTube on the big screen, cool, no problem. I'll show you what I got on my screen. You can read along as well. So quick recap. We are deep into what we consider to be the Pauline narrative, okay? The Paul story. Narrative's the fancy word for story. We're deep in a Paul story. Paul, at this point in time, we're mostly in the book of Acts, okay? We've danced a little bit with his letters, kind of here and there, but mostly we've been tracking in the book of Acts, which is in the back half of your Bible. And we've seen how Paul is an incredible preacher, an incredible missionary. He's traveled all over the world. And in doing so, he's made some enemies too, though, right? I mean, he's got incredible following, he's got incredible influence, but he also has significant number of people who don't like him because what he's preaching and what he's teaching is totally radical. I mean, he's preaching and teaching about a guy who came back from the dead, who is overturning most of the systems and ways of thinking in this world. And so he's bringing this message to both Jews and non-Jews, which has been a theme throughout our time together, right? That Paul believes Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. Yes, he is the Jewish Messiah, but make no mistake, this Jewish Messiah is really meant for the whole world. And so Paul believes him to be the Messiah for Jews and non-Jews. And that's causing a lot of friction, particularly with the Jews, even Christian Jews. That is, Jews who follow Jesus but believe that you still need to also follow all the Jewish laws. All right, so there's been a lot of friction between Paul and certain groups of people. So much so that where we left off, Paul had come to Jerusalem in ancient Israel, and going into that, he had told and visited a lot of people that he felt like the Spirit was making it clear, right? We saw this. Nothing but struggles, suffering, pain is out in front of him by this time. Paul knows that whatever is in front of him, it will be hard. It will be difficult. He's very Jesus-y, okay? He's messianic in his movement towards Jerusalem. He sets his face towards Jerusalem and heads to Jerusalem. And sure enough, when he gets to Jerusalem, we kind of left off at this point where there's this big mob that finds out he's hanging out in the temple, and they get all riled up because some of Paul's enemies, guys who don't like Paul, aren't on board with Paul, get the whole city in an uproar that Paul is supposedly teaching people how to be anti-Jewish. Not true, but that was the party line. And enough so that a Roman centurion had to show up, a Roman dude with the Roman guard, whose primary purpose is to make sure that the uppity Jews don't cause more rebellions. That's the Jews were well known for being a rebellious bunch, and so Rome was all over. Anytime there's like an uproar in the city, the guards were out in force. All right, put down the rioting type stuff. And here you have people upset about this Paul guy. Paul goes into Roman custody because at least he's safe there, and the Romans can figure out what in the world is going on. Like, who are you? Why is everybody angry at you? And why is the city turned out trying to kill you, Mr. Paul? And so that's kind of where we left off, with this exchange between Paul and this Roman guard, the Roman leader, the Roman centurion. Is he officially a centurion? He's the commander. He's the leader of the Roman group that's protecting him, the soldiers. So, okay. See, last time we went into the okay, I can kind of dance a little bit in and out of the scriptures, guys, simply because we have so much ground to cover. Let's do it. It's too good not to show you the scriptures. So here you go. I'm in Acts chapter 22. Paul finishes talking up with this commander and then asks if he can speak to the Jewish people who are so upset with him. And the commander says, okay, you want to talk to the Jews who really want your blood? Okay. And so Paul gives this long sermon where he begins by reminding them that he is a Jew, born in Tarsus, that's his hometown. He was educated here in Jerusalem under Gamaliel. And so as a student, I was carefully trained in our Jewish laws and customs. And here you go. I became very zealous to honor God in everything I did, just like all of you today. So I became zealous. And the word zealous there is associated with like zealot. And that is to be so fervent about what they believed God wanted to the point of being violent against those who were, in their perception, against God. I persecuted followers of the way. That's what Christianity was known as before it was Christianity, was the way. Hounding some to death, arresting men and women, throwing them in prison. And he basically, Paul gives this long sermon where he tells them of his conversion. He tells them his conversion story. And at the end of his conversion story, he finishes up with how Jesus told him to be a missionary to the Gentiles. So he goes through this long story of conversion and how faithful he was as a Jew prior to that. But he finishes with this super controversial statement where he says, but the Lord, Jesus, said to me, go, for I will send you far away to the Gentiles. So he names at the end of his sermon, it's like the punchline. He names at the end of the sermon the big hot topic: Gentiles, non-Jews. That supposedly Paul was sent to minister, love on, and preach to non-Jews. The crowd listened to everything up until there, and then they go bananas again. Okay? The commander brings Paul inside, orders him lashed and whipped. He's like, okay, we got to figure this out. We got some pretty heavy opinions going on, right? And so the commander makes the decision to say, let's whip him, let's discipline him, and then turn him loose again. And maybe if we whip him, he'll confess to something else, right? I mean, you have to remember that for the Romans, they don't understand what's happening. Well, they don't get this whole Jew, non-Jew thing. The Romans don't understand. They just see a bunch of really mad Jewish people who are fervent about their religion, and this guy somehow offended them in their religion, okay? So he just wants to find some measure of peace here and see what the real crime is, okay? So he says he's going to whip him, and before he gets whipped, Paul looks at the commander and says, I'm a Roman citizen. You're not supposed to whip me. The commander, upon learning that Paul is a Roman citizen, says, wait, hold horses. Holy cow. You're a citizen? You're a Roman citizen? One of the things that we've talked about before is that there is class distinction in the Roman Empire. There is Roman citizens and non-Roman citizens. Roman citizens are afforded tremendous privilege. Tremendous privilege. And Paul is a Roman citizen by birth. He was somehow born into a family with the privilege of being considered a Roman citizen. We can talk about that someday else. That's a rabbit hole to go down to. But basically, it's a big deal. And you can't whip a Roman citizen without a trial. If he wasn't a Roman citizen, it's like, yeah, go ahead, Mr. Commander, do whatever you want to this guy. But because he's a citizen of the Roman Empire, he is entitled to certain rights and privileges, specifically a trial. You can't mete out punishment without a trial. And so Paul tells the soldier, hey, I'm a citizen. And the soldier says, whoa, all right, that changes things. So he just throws him in jail instead. The Roman soldier wants to find out more information about like what's going on here. So he everybody cools their jets overnight. And then the Roman begins the day by bringing Paul before the Jewish council. So before it was in front of a mob of angry Jews, now the Roman says, fine, get all the Jewish leaders together and help explain this to me. Why are you mad at this guy, Paul? Paul makes a brilliant move in chapter 23. Absolutely brilliant. The Romans are just watching. They're confused. They don't understand this is a religious matter in their opinion. In the historic Jewish culture, way of life, and society as a whole, there are different factions, different camps, and the two prominent camps that make up the Jewish leading council are Pharisees and Sadducees. You might have heard them before in the Bible. They get talked about a bunch. Pharisees and Sadducees. The Pharisees have their own specialities, and the Sadducees have their own specialities. Paul, a previous Pharisee, knows that they don't get along all the time. And so what he does is when he stands in front of them, basically on Jewish trial, with the Romans watching, he stands in front of the council and he drops the big theological bomb that he knows is going to make everybody mad, but not mad at him, mad at each other. Oh, Paul is so sneaky. He's so sneaky. Sneaky. Paul gets them to argue about the resurrection after the dead. After you die, Pharisees believe that there's a day of judgment and that God raises the dead. Sadducees do not believe in life after death. So Paul stands in front of the high council and says, what's the big deal? What I have done is simply preach and teach about life after death. And immediately, everybody starts yelling at each other. He's so sneaky. Here he is. He's saying, I'm preaching and teaching about life after death, which he is. He's preaching about Jesus, who was risen from the dead. But from there on, it goes bananas. Everybody yells at each other, and he is no longer the issue. The issue has changed and been shifted. The attention is no longer on him. So Paul's very smart. One more thing happens. Here you go. Let me show you in the scriptures. One more big thing happens. So things get so heated that as the conflict between the Pharisees and the Sadducees gets violent. So now they're not only violent with Paul, but they're violent with each other. The Roman commander was afraid they would tear Paul apart. So Paul is caught in the middle of these two warring factions. And so the Roman commander orders him to go and rescue him by force and take him back to the fortress, i.e. jail. So they're going to they're getting Paul out of there. The Roman commander's like, bad idea. This was not a good idea. So bail, get the guy out of there and run, everybody. That night in jail, the Lord, and anytime you see that in this context, Jesus appears to Paul. Okay, so Jesus has another theophany, a revelation. He shows up. Okay, Paul's hanging out, and whether we don't know if it's a dream, we don't know if it's a vision, we don't know, but somehow Jesus shows up and he speaks to Paul, and he says something very important. He says, "Be encouraged, Paul. Just as you have been a witness to me here in Jerusalem, you must also preach the good news in Rome as well." So here Paul is in the middle of this mess in Jerusalem. He's sitting in jail. Jesus shows up and says, "Paul, you've done good. You're going to make it to Rome. So don't worry about right now." Biblical principle, guys. When Jesus says something's going to happen, it's a promise. It's going to happen. What he says goes. So from this point on, Paul can take full confidence that somehow he will preach the good news in Rome. His life will not be over before he gets to Rome. Now, Jesus doesn't give the finer details about how he's going to get there, what's the timeline, and all that sort of stuff, or what's going to happen in between. But Jesus gives him the promise that he will preach in Rome. That's really important because, we'll talk about it. So some more messes happen. If you track along, I don't want to get lost in the details, but some Jews make this crazy pact to be assassins, and they want to kill him. And so the Roman commander finds out that there's an assassination plot. And things are just getting out of hand. The whole city is in an uproar. The council that leads the Jewish people are in an uproar. And now there's this group of zealous Jews who have committed to themselves to assassinate Paul. And the commander is like, we are getting out of Dodge. Get out of here. Make this guy somebody else's problem, because he's been nothing but a headache for this poor Roman commander up until now. So the commander calls some officers together. He gets some soldiers together, and he says, "Look, we got to run this up the chain. Time to send this guy to the governor." Okay? And the governor's seat of power is actually not in Jerusalem. The governor, Roman governor, clarification. The Roman governor, because it's being run up the chain to the Roman legal system, You guys tracking? He's a Roman citizen. He's got to run up the chain to the Roman legal system. So he's got to go to the seat of power where Rome is truly present. And that's actually not Jerusalem. Jerusalem is where the Jews love to hang out and where all the revolts happen. But the seat of power for Rome is actually in a different place. It's in Caesarea Philippi. So he packs him up and he sends him off. I got a map. You guys love maps. You go, whoop, nope, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. Okay, there you go. Now you can see the whole map. All right. So on the bottom of the screen, you have Jerusalem is on the bottom left-hand side. And the soldier takes him farther up along the coastline to the place where the governor was hanging out. And Caesarea is on the coastline. It's a major place of trade. It's where they could communicate with Rome that much faster, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a major marina there. There's a major port in Caesarea. So it's the big place for Rome's contact. And this is where the Roman soldier then hands him over to the governor. The governor's name is Felix. Felix, Felix. And so Governor Felix he's a smart guy. I mean, Governor Felix is a smart guy. He kind of knows what's up. He knows that something's going on here. And he knows specifically that the Jewish people can be difficult. There's a reason why he's the governor of the Jewish area. He's familiar with this religious nonsense in the eyes of Rome, okay? So they present him, when they arrived in Caesarea, they presented Paul and the letter to Governor Felix. There's a letter that goes along with him, okay? And Felix says, okay, I'll hear your case as soon as your accusers, the Jews in Jerusalem who are angry with you, show up. So back in a jail he goes. 5 days later, Ananias, the high priest, arrived with some Jewish elders and a lawyer, okay? And they're there to argue the case and try to get Paul put to death. Same way Jesus was. Same concept going on here, okay? If you remember in the Jesus narrative, Jesus gets shoveled around to a couple different kings and regional kings and regional bigwigs, politicians and so forth, influencers. Jesus does. It's the same kind of concept here. Paul gets shoveled along to another place, and now they're going to go through this whole trial where they're going to have to make a trial based on, not on Roman laws, but on a Jewish framework, which is going to be their challenge. And believe it or not, that is the problem. We found this man to be a troublemaker. Okay, so that's the case that they're making. He's constantly stirring up riots among the Jews all over the world. So to argue, the Jews can't argue based on religion. They have to argue based on Paul is a troublemaker, and he's causing confusion among people and causing riots. He is a ringleader of the cult known as the Nazarenes. They're Christians. Okay. Furthermore, he was trying to desecrate the temple when we arrested him. You can find out the truth of your accusations by examining him yourself. Well, Paul steps forward and gives his side of the story. He admits to being a follower of the way, which they call a cult. And then he goes on to say, I worship the God of our ancestors. I firmly believe the Jewish law and everything written in the prophets. I have the same hope in God that these men have, that he will raise both the righteous and the unrighteous. Because of this, I always try to maintain a clear conscience before God and all people. After several years away, I returned to Jerusalem with money to aid my people offer sacrifices to God. My accusers saw me in the temple as I was completing a purification ceremony. So his accusers want him put to death because he causes riots. Paul turns around and says, this is a religious matter. We just disagree on some religious things. He even goes, he shouts, I am on trial before you today because I believe in the resurrection of the dead. Okay? So, while the accusers are trying to make him sound like this dangerous character, Paul's like, No, I believe something different. And if Felix is willing to believe Paul that this is a religious matter, then Paul's good to go. If he's a rioter, if he's a troublemaker, a little rebel, then he's causing problems for Rome, and Felix can put him to death. Felix listens to all this stuff, and then he kicks the can. Poor guy. Felix is kind of like I don't know. He doesn't do well in the biblical narrative. He kicks the can and avoids the whole thing, beginning to end. First, he waits for the garrison commander to arrive and says, "Then I'll give you my opinion." Then his wife, who is Jewish, shows up, and she's curious. It seems like when she shows up, they start listening to this whole Jesus thing. And because they started listening to Paul talk about Jesus and see some of these theological nuances, Felix begins to be convinced that this is not a rioter. This is not a gosh, I wish there was a different term because that's such a loaded contextual term for today's world. A rabble rouser, right? Felix doesn't see Paul to be that. And even more, it says, Felix becomes frightened. He becomes intimidated because of what Paul preaches and teaches. Here we go. As he reasoned with them about righteousness and self-control on the coming day of judgment, Felix becomes frightened. "Go away for now. When it's more convenient, I'll call upon you again." He also hoped that Paul would bribe him, so he sent out for him quite often and talked with him. So Felix doesn't pass judgment, keeps him in jail for 2 years. 2 years this goes on. Isn't that nuts? Basically, here we go. Felix wanted to gain favor with the Jewish people, so he left Paul in prison. So Felix doesn't want to cause a riot and upset the Jewish people, so he leaves Paul in the can, leaves him in jail, even though he seems to believe that Paul is not this rabble rouser. He's just a religious fanatic who believes something different. So Felix can't justify putting him to death, according to Rome, but he doesn't want to make the Jewish people mad. So he toes a line, and he just throws him and leaves him to rot in jail for a while. And the whole time he's hoping that maybe Paul will kick him something under the table, and, nothing happens. 2 years. Paul sits in jail in Caesarea. All right. Eventually, Felix, as governor, is succeeded. Change of the guard. Another guy comes in named Festus. Yes, Felix and Festus. Confusion, I know. Well, Festus comes in as the new governor and finds out that this Paul guy has been sitting in jail, and he's here to help clean up Felix's mess. He's here to whip people into shape. You don't get the sense that Felix was a very good administrator, and Festus comes in and he's ready to crack the whip and hey, what's going on, Felix? Festus is here to be let's clean all this up. So 3 days after Festus arrives to take over new responsibilities, he leaves for Jerusalem, and he meets with the leaders there who remind him that Paul is sitting in jail. So they're still mad at Paul. They have not forgotten. They ask Festus as a favor to transfer Paul to Jerusalem. Why? Because they still want to kill him themselves. They still want to assassinate him. Festus replies that Paul was at Caesarea and he would be returning there himself soon. Okay? If Paul has done anything wrong, you can come and make your accusations. So it's back to square one. It just starts all over. It starts all over. New guy. We got to go through the whole trial all over again. So Festus runs back, and it happens again. When Paul arrives, So they gather in the courtroom. Paul shows up. The Jewish leaders show up. Paul denies the charges. He says, I am not guilty of any crime against the Jewish laws or the temple or the Roman government. Festus, wanting to please the Jews, asks him, will you go to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there? Why does Festus ask this question? Probably because he knows the Jews will simply take care of the problem by murdering Paul on the way to Jerusalem. If Paul goes to Jerusalem, he's a dead man. So Festus, in a kind of a sneaky way, says, hey, I'll see you. I'll do your trial in Jerusalem. You want to do that? And Paul sees through it. No, this is an official Roman court, so I ought to be tried right here. He can see that he's playing the game, right? And Paul calls him on it. You know very well I am not guilty of harming the Jews. If I have done something worthy of death, I don't refuse to die. But if I'm innocent, no one has a right to turn me over to these men to kill me. And then he says the big line. He says, I appeal to Caesar. Now, as a Roman citizen, he's basically pushing it up the court system. Just like we have different courts, right? That's exactly what Paul is doing. And he's just jumping to the Supreme Court, okay? He's jumping to the highest court you can go to by saying, I appeal to Caesar. Caesar actually held court. And so you could go and argue your case in front of Caesar if you were a Roman citizen. So Festus, much like Felix in this way, just is like, doesn't want to upset the Jews, and says, all right, you appeal to Caesar you shall go. So Paul is not headed to Jerusalem. The Jews will not get their satisfaction of killing him in Jerusalem. Festus isn't going to have to worry about him anymore because he's going to be out of his hair. He's just going to be gone. He's sending him on to Rome, right? This will also fulfill what Jesus promised him. To Rome you shall go. There's this weird thing that happens with another guy named King Agrippa. King Agrippa is a local ruler who is heavily influenced. He grew up in Roman culture and heavily influenced. I think he was a Roman hostage or something, if my memory's correct. He grew up under Claudius's influence. So he grew up Roman. Basically, he's a Jew who grew up Roman. This is what they would do. They would take royalty from local areas, bring them to Rome, train them to be good Romans, and then send them back as puppets. And so King Agrippa is a puppet back in the area, ruling a geographic area, following his father, Agrippa I. This is actually Agrippa II. He follows his father's footsteps, becomes king, and he's really curious about this. He's curious about Paul, which is really fascinating. And so he and his sister Bernice, they came to hang out and see Festus. And while they're there, we get this whole thing about sitting with Paul. There's more there. We don't have time to talk about it tonight. But yeah, the big statement comes at the end where I'm finding it for you. Okay, here we go. Festus says, hey, I got this guy Paul. This is the backdrop. This is what happened. You think this guy is crazy? Like, you think he's guilty? Is he worth sending on to Rome? You know, I've decided to send him to Rome. What do you think? After meeting with Paul, King Agrippa says, it makes no sense to send a prisoner to the emperor without specifying charges against him. And, yeah. So here it is. Okay. So this is what happens. I need to know what to tell Rome is basically what Festus says. It makes no sense for us to send a prisoner to the emperor without naming the charges against him, but I don't understand any of this Jewish nonsense. So what do I do? King Agrippa sits down with Paul and says, you may speak your defense. And so Paul does another round of telling people his life story and his conversion and all this sort of stuff. Long, big. In the end, this is where Agrippa lands at this point. If he hadn't appealed to Caesar, you could let this guy go. This man has done nothing to deserve death or imprisonment. So Agrippa basically says, this is a religious matter. This is not a Roman matter. This guy's fine. If he wouldn't have appealed to Caesar, you just let him go. But he appealed to Caesar. So to Caesar you shall go. In order to get to Caesar, you got to take a long route, right? Let's, here we go. Let's show you the map, because y'all love them maps. Here you go. Here's a map. So Paul is on the right-hand side of your screen. That's where he's starting in those arrows. He's hanging out on the coastline, in the Mediterranean coastline, and he hops a ship. And he's got to go all the way to Rome. The ship, according to Acts, like it tells you exactly where he goes and kind of like what happens. The ship goes past the island of Cyprus and heads over to kind of modern-day Turkey area. And there they get on a bigger ship. Then they head over farther west to the island of Crete. Okay? And time is passing. By the time they get to the island of Crete, it's like fall, border winter. And you do not want to sail the Mediterranean in winter. Not good. So Paul actually says, having traveled and done a fair amount of seafaring himself, he in these waters, I mean, Paul was sailing the seas, right? We saw that in his missionary routes. He says, hey guys, Mr. Captain dude, I suggest that we hold over here for a while. And so they hang out on Crete for a little bit, but when there's a good wind, the captain says, let's chance it. Bad move. Not smart. But that's what they do. They chance it. So they head over, and this is the biggest stretch. You can see that, right? In this big stretch from the island that's in the middle of your screen over towards Sicily and Italy, the boot. In that trip from Crete to the island towards Rome, the ship gets lost in a storm. Big storm happens. They throw, stuff overboard to try to lighten the boat. No luck. They throw gear over. No luck. And eventually, they get shipwrecked, okay? It's this big narrative that the author of Acts, Luke, takes us through, that the bow of the ship breaks apart, it's smashed by waves, all this sort of stuff. The soldiers want to kill the prisoners, because this is a prisoner transport ship. But the commanding officer actually comes to Paul's defense and says, no, you can't kill this guy. He started to create a friendship with Paul. Paul seems to, when he spends time with people start to like him the more they spend time with him. And so at this point, the soldier the guard who's been kind of attending to Paul and caring for Paul, says, no, Paul's a good guy. No, don't kill the prisoners. So they don't. And everybody jumps overboard and grabs onto debris, and they float to this tiny little island. You probably can't even see it on your map there, but it's called Malta, and it's right below Sicily. Okay, Rome is in purple. Italy's in purple. The big island off the boot is Sicily, and right below that is a tiny, tiny, tiny island, tiny island called Malta. And that is where the ship ends up, okay? Or what's left of the ship. Rome is still a little ways away, and Paul ends up at this shipwrecked on Malta. The people who find him are like, what is up with this? It's a shipwreck. Oh my goodness, So Paul and those around him, they start a little fire. They're trying to dry out. They're trying to recuperate. And some of the locals are there trying to help and see what's going on. And in the process, Paul gets bit by a snake. It's kind of this weird exchange that happens in the Bible. Paul gets bitten by a snake, and he just like grabs the snake and a poisonous snake, and he shakes him off. He doesn't die, and the locals are like, "What? He didn't die? Who is this guy?" They're waiting for Paul to die, and he doesn't. So at first, they thought they were just these shipwrecked sailors who are foreigners, and then the locals decide, wow, this Paul guy must be divine. And so they start bringing people to him, having seen this like miracle that he survived this poisonous snake, and he heals them. Okay, so the local island, all of a sudden, of Malta starts to love this guy because Paul heals a bunch of dudes. Paul heals a bunch of locals who are sick. And all the while, he continues to minister, preach to, and, bear witness to the Roman guards that continue to try to feel like they're his, he's their steward. He's their charge. He's their charge. So miracles are happening. People are he continues to preach Jesus. Eventually, he makes his way up farther north. Okay, they do actually get on some more ships and hop to Sicily. They hop to Italy. Along the way, they stop and see some other Christians. Kind of cool. And in fact, when they get to Rome, it's really amazing, actually. As they go up the coastline, they see some other Christians along the way, and then eventually they come to Rome itself. So now Paul finally is in Rome. Okay, he's finally made it to Rome. And this is where his story comes to a rousing conclusion. And being Paul, the first thing that he does is he's created a deep friendship now with his Roman guards. He is under very, very, very loose house arrest. Okay? He's up in Rome, and he is, according to the Bible, Paul was permitted to have his own private house, and he was guarded by a single soldier. So he's under house arrest with one dude. And he can go buy food, he can go out, he can leave, he can do stuff. His trial is in the queue, if you will. All right? And Paul, being Paul, even though he's under house arrest, does what he does. The first thing he does is he goes to the local synagogue, and he starts preaching at them Jews. He starts preaching about Jesus. He starts preaching and teaching about the Messiah. And he encourages and wins over many new converts. That's just Paul's jam. That's like what Paul does. Let me show you where it is. I'm in Acts 28 already. 3 days after Paul's arrival in Rome, he called together the local Jewish leaders. He said to them, "Brothers, I was arrested in Jerusalem, handed over to the Roman government, even though I did nothing against our people or customs or ancestors." How big geographically? The emperor at the time is Nero. Good question. Really good question. The emperor at the time is Nero. Let's see if we can get it. Map of Roman Empire under Nero. This is like 60, 80 or so. Let me see if I can get you a map. Roman Empire 60 AD. Let's try that. It's big. Wow. Yeah, I mean it's just massive. Let me see if I can please be patient. Please be patient. I'm getting it for you. I don't like that map as much. Oh, that's way later. I mean, it's all over the Mediterranean. He would have known. One of the big things that happens is Paul does express that he wishes he could go farther east, like Spain. He really wants to go to Spain. He shares that in his letters. Here we go. Okay, I got one. Open in a new window. Open image in a tab. All right, here's how big it is. So you can see credit is going to, oh shoot, I already got rid of the, forgive me for not being able to cite this, guys. But this is 6080. Okay, so you can see the Roman Empire is north of Africa, basically the majority of Western Europe, and then it spans over into modern day Turkey. So it's pretty, I mean, it's up in Britannia, it's up in Great Britain, right? So to the east, you got different things happening. But it's at the height, one of the height of its power. It's at one of the stronger points in its history. Maybe a little bit on the downswing by this time. Some really nasty, weird stuff has happened by this point in time. All right, let me hop back. By this point in time, Nero himself is crazy. He is. He's like literally crazy. He's insane. So at this time, it's 60 AD. Nero is in charge. Nero as an emperor is considered to be, by all accounts, like every historian looks at Nero and is like, yeah, that guy, whoa, talk about messed up. There is story after story of examples of how incredibly incompetent as well as just psychotic psychosis. The guy just visions and things. He made idols of himself and statues. He believed he was a god before he died. He burned half of Rome. That's one of the most famous things he's famous for, actually, is a couple of years after Paul's death, Nero sets fire to Rome, burns Rome, his own capital. He lights his own capital in the slums on fire, and then he actually blames the Christians. It's fascinating. Christians are on the upswing among the poor and even some of the wealthy as well. They're on the upswing on like the social outcasts, like people who aren't on the inside of Rome, more the peripheral peoples are getting into this Christian thing, largely because of Paul's witness. Paul comes, and there's already a church in Rome. Paul bolsters and helps to grow it. And a couple of years after his death, in 64, 64. I think it's 64. In 64, Rome burns, and Nero blames the Christians. So Paul is ironically is appealing to Nero. Like that's who he's appealing to. And the guy before Nero, Claudius, was also not a fan of the Christian people. Rome itself was just not a fan of the Christian people. It doesn't have a good, not until much later. All right, let me get back quick. Let me wrap up, and then we should talk about some of that stuff too. So Paul, basically, this is the end. I mean, of Acts, at least. Paul preaches in the synagogue, talks to people, preaches Jesus, and the end of what we know in the Bible. Here, I'll show it to you. The end of what we've got in the Bible about Paul, like in terms of like historical account, the end of Acts, it ends like this. He gives this speech to the local synagogue and to the local believers, and it really ends with this emphasis on, not surprisingly, that I want you to know that this salvation from God has also been offered to the Gentiles, and they will accept it. That Paul, in his story, cannot be separated from his radical inclusion of the Gentile people in God's salvific history. That God intends to save the whole world. That Paul's radical claim that Jesus is for everybody is really the emphasis of how this finishes. It's the exclamation point. Luke is not as concerned here with how Paul actually dies. That's not Luke's greatest concern. The author's Luke. His greatest concern is for you and me as the reader to know how deeply tied to this Messiah and proclaiming him for the sake of the world that Paul was. Paul in his life was just bound to preaching and teaching Jesus for the world. So for the next 2 years, Paul lived in Rome at his own expense. He welcomed all who visited him, boldly proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching about the Lord Jesus Christ, and no one tried to stop him. And that's it. That's how it finishes. Dun, dun, dun. Then you're into other stuff. Then you're into his letters. So the last time we get kind of like a historical narrative about Paul is he is sitting in house arrest, waiting for his trial. It's probably around 60 AD. And he hangs out there for 2 years before he is executed. We know from extra biblical content, Paul is executed. He dies. The finer details of the when and the how, people debate. Most people, most scholars believe that he was executed under Nero. Tradition has it that he was beheaded. So they cut his head off, that his body was buried there. Some people, because of some of the content in what are called the disputed letters of Paul, suggest that he actually left Rome. He was let go, left Rome, traveled to Spain, because he writes in his letters how he wants to go to Spain so badly. And then returns to Rome, gets rearrested, and then is beheaded in like 66 or 67 AD. And I don't know. I tend to, yeah. I think it's fair to say that most scholars kind of make the assumption that he was arrested and he was executed. He certainly influenced, if not penning himself, he influenced, and his students would have written the other letters that are attributed to him. What I'm talking about here, and we don't have time to go into the finer details, but in the Bible, Paul wrote 13 letters, 7 of which are considered undisputed. That's the term they use. By that, they mean that Paul claims to be the author, and everybody is utterly convinced, yes, Paul is the author. Okay. But there are 6 letters that are his authorship, as in he himself sitting down and writing it or dictating it, is a little bit more like, was it him? Was it one of his students? Did he write parts of it? And other people maybe some of his other students came along and helped with more. It's a little, just some more questions around it. It in no way diminishes, however, Paul, nor the biblical mandate of it being included within the canon. It's a fancy way of saying it's still Bible, even though there's stuff about it that makes us scratch our heads. The Bible is the Bible, warts and all, as one of the authors I like says it. So we have to take the Bible as it is and allow it to be God's word as it is. And that means with the questions and with the confusion. It's one of the beautiful things about the Bible is that it does have questions. It leaves us with questions and confusion, which is perfectly reflective of the human reality. We have to live our lives with questions and confusion, which is why faith plays such an important role. The Bible demands faith of us, right? It is a book of truth. It is less concerned with facts and far more concerned with the truth, and the truth being the person of Jesus Christ. Okay, that is a debate, conversation. I shouldn't say debate. That is a conversation for another day. That's a teaching for another day on the difference between fact versus truth and person versus. Anyways, so Paul writes, however, significant portions of the Bible. Certainly, his role in Christianity reverberates to this very day. He is the centerpiece figure of Acts, really. I mean, I guess you have to be careful how you say that, but his story is so deeply narrated in Acts, and then he wrote many of the letters that we have in the New Testament, helping us theologically understand Jesus. There's so much more that we could say about Paul. My recommendation, if you enjoyed watching these, if you want to find out more, the best book that I recommend, I've done it, I think, earlier on this video podcast, whatever we call this thing. The book that I recommend for people is Paul by N.T. Wright. Tom Wright writes a fabulous book. Bishop Wright writes an incredible book on Paul, lending his expertise, studies, scholarship to better understanding Paul. So if you're looking for a good book on Paul, N.T. Wright, you can go to Amazon, pick it up, go to your local library and pick it up. He goes into far more detail. I don't want to shortchange the significance of Paul's theology. We really focused more on trying to understand Paul chronologically and in terms of historically, what might have his part of his life looked like. If you go back to the very beginning, we talked about how he was a Pharisee, how he grew up in Tarsus, how he had these incredible transformative moments, particularly on the road to Damascus. And then the end of his life takes him to this place where he's now proclaiming Jesus all over the world, finishing at Rome, where he is finally executed as a martyr in the church. And so there is definitely a full circle, a thematic full circle that happens in Paul's life, where the first time we meet Paul, he is a young man looking approvingly upon Stephen, the first martyr of the church, as Stephen, one of the first Christian to be killed for his faith. Here we find Paul now standing with Stephen, being killed for that same faith. There's so many themes to Paul's life about transformation, about call, about just the radical ways in which, Jesus demands everything from us and gives everything to us. Paul's letters include some of these you might hear, like Romans. Is the letter to the Romans is his theological masterpiece. It is extremely complex. It demands a deep knowledge of the Old Testament and Jewish thinking and Jewish life. So don't just pick that one up and think you're going to grasp it all in one read, okay? If you're interested in reading some of Paul's writings. If you want to read some of Paul's writings, I'd probably recommend Philippians. Philippians is a letter that he wrote to the church in Philippi. He was chased out of Philippi, ironically. He was chased out of there, but the church that he started does really well. He started a church there, and he writes to them. And Philippians is the letter that he wrote, and it's a really happy book. It's a really happy letter. It's a letter full of joy and a lot of trying to understand Jesus and who Jesus was, Christology. It's beautiful. It's really, really great book to read if you're looking to try to better understand Paul. Read Philippians. It's not very long. You could read it in, over a cup of coffee, 20 minutes. You could sit down and read the whole thing. It's only a couple chapters. If you're looking for some other stuff, Galatians and Ephesians are also two very well-known letters by the Apostle Paul. They take a little bit more context, but if you've been tracking with us, you might be able to kind of run with them and get it. Galatians, as an example, is where he is yelling at a church. It's meant to be sent all over Galatia, which is modern-day Turkey, and it's to all the churches there who are starting to fall into the trap of believing that you have to be Jewish in order to believe and follow Jesus. You have to be circumcised. You have to follow all the laws. And Galatians just fervently denies that. No! He gets really steamed in Galatians. So there are letters called the pastoral letters. Those are a little bit more, those are the disputed ones, but they're really great. 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus. There are letters written, for example, 1st and 2nd Timothy are letters written to Timothy that we picked up in Acts. We learned about his intern, Timothy, kind of his student, his pupil. Timothy ends up being one of his go-to guys, and he raises him up and turns him loose as one of the primary voices of the gospel in the Mediterranean. So 1st and 2nd Timothy are beautiful exhortations to the church and leaders in the church, and particularly those who are younger, on the younger side. It can be very, very encouraging for those in positions of leadership and things like that. Trying to cultivate Christian leadership First and Second Timothy are really good for that. So, anyways, there's so much more that we could say about Paul, but of course, we have to come to a close, and it is in fact right now 8:30. What'd you guys think? Did you like the Paul series? Come on now, jump in those comments. Let me know. Yes, no, longer, shorter. Wish you could have gotten more. You like the maps? Do we have enough maps for you? Highlights. What did you like most? Which part of Paul's life did you like learning about most? Throw that in the comments for me. Did you like the pace? Thought the pace was pretty good. What about Paul struck you? What is it from Paul's life that you felt challenged by or surprised you? Did you learn something about Paul's life that you're like, I did not know that. Love maps. Good. Just for you, lots of maps. Lots and lots and lots of maps. We had bunches of maps. If you go to the back of your Bible, if you have a physical Bible, you can often find there's in a lot, not all, but in many Bibles, particularly study Bibles, you'll actually find maps often frequently in the back of your physical Bible. So I encourage you to take a peek if you do like maps to a physical Bible, see if you have some maps in the back of your Bible. Often they'll cover Paul's missionary journeys. It shows you how geographically far, right? We said this earlier. Here's one of the surprising statistics for you. Paul probably traveled more than 10,000 miles in his travels. I mean, that is a lot. That is a lot of ground to cover. Yeah. Anything surprise you guys, or favorite aspects of Paul? Stuff you wish you would have known more of, or stuff that you're like, wow, I didn't know that about Paul. I know for myself, when I think back, yeah, I was shocked by that too, the 10-year period. I was fascinated by that too, Patty, that there's just this gap of 10 years in the beginning, shortly after it's kind of where it lands, but there's this quiet period for Paul where we're really shocked by the fact that prior to his missionary journeys, Paul had an entire decade where he was just working on his theology and preaching and teaching and working out what it means to be a Christian person. And certainly, I mean, that's a long time, 10 years before he really kind of exploded on the scene, and before his friend at the time, Barnabas, brings him over to help lead the church in Antioch. That's just absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Yeah, what else, guys? Anything else? Stuff that you were surprised by? I always find it really helpful and surprised by how he tells us how fervent he was and how zealous he was as a Pharisee, but I think every time I revisit, good, glad it was good for you, John. Excited for the next one. Excited for the next Divine Drama with you. It'll be great. I really valued, I think, getting perspective into the significance of Paul's upbringing as a child and as a youth, how fervent. I hope we captured just the almost radical nature with which he, I think it's beautiful that the overwhelming dedication and fervor that at one time was directed towards living out all of the 613 commandments got fulfilled in the person of Jesus. And so it's not that those 613 commandments went out the window, it's that it just got funneled into a singular person and what it means to follow the commandments and the command of that singular person of Jesus Christ, right? And so that fervor and that passion and that zeal just got narrowed from 613 commands into the one command of following Jesus. Whatever Jesus says, whatever Jesus wants, that's what my life is going to be all about. And I think that's a challenging thing, I think, in my own regard too, when I think of like, oh yeah, wow, to be singularly focused on what Jesus commands, asks, invites. That's just powerful. Yeah, right. I mean, yeah. Joe, totally. Paul's arrest, the fact that this pretty much the whole narrative for Paul happened within the context of the Roman world, which set up the ability for the gospel to travel. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, it's not uncommon for preachers and teachers to talk about this, but simply put, the gospel traveled the Roman roads with Paul's feet. Rome had Jesus came at just the right time, right? Where people could travel in a way that previously was unexpected. You couldn't travel across the entire globe and have that kind of an impact, right? And yet with Paul, he literally walked the earth using Roman roads and bringing with him the gospel. So thanks to the Romans for being so master engineers and so dedicated to tying their entire empire together that it allowed the Christian teachings to flourish. I mean, just went like wildfire as news spread that this Jesus came back from the dead. It's fascinating. Yeah, there's that's another good one, Patty. There's a ton of parallels between the life of Paul and the life of Jesus, which actually echoes in his writings. When you think about it, Paul is trying to cultivate in us, in each one of us, right, to teach us how we ourselves can be more Christ-like. And that's so good that that registers for you, because Paul himself becomes more and more Christ-like as his life goes on. He embraces and becomes more and more a reflection of Jesus, to the point of sacrificing his own life for the well-being of the world, right? I mean, that's basically what Paul did. He sacrificed his life by going to Rome, being executed as a martyr for the chance to proclaim to the world the resurrection of Jesus and life, death, resurrection of Jesus. So there's a ton of strong parallels between Paul and Jesus, and the invitation, likewise, the challenge put to each one of us to similarly walk in the ways of Jesus, follow in the path of Jesus. And as we do that, we become, like Paul, we become a reflection of Jesus with his priorities, his self-sacrificing ways of being. So it's very fascinating and challenging too. So good. Any other last comments? Otherwise, that's great, guys. Thanks. I really appreciate being able to hear and see some of that stuff. If you do have more comments or you want to share more stuff, I do enjoy hearing kind of your thoughts, your reflections, ideas. So feel free to drop me an email if you want, and let me know if you had any further thoughts. I love being in conversation with you guys. I hope that this series was good for you. There you go. Interesting side note. Nice. So Joe just dropped an email link. Sorry. Joe dropped a link in the community page. Joe just dropped a link in the community page about the fire. If you want to learn more about Nero's, the suspect of Nero in the fire. It's super. Nero's a fascinating but seriously disturbed person. Thanks for finding that, Joe. Oh, here you go. Yeah, that's exactly right. Oh, that's a great comment, Trudy. Paul was always very passionate for God, but God redirected him from eliminating Christians to becoming one. Absolutely. I would even say, absolutely, wholeheartedly, yes. I would even add to that, not only becoming one himself, but making more. Right? So he went from eliminating Christians to making Christians himself chief among them. Well, yeah, great point, Trudy. Absolutely, guys. Well, thanks for joining me on the journey. All of these videos are cataloged and available for you on YouTube. If you go to the CC3 playlist, you can find those there. And I went in. I'm going to try to do a better job, guys, of tracking the lists and naming and making sure that they're easily found for you guys. So I'm going to try to do a better job of doing that. But thanks for joining me tonight. You can always join me on Thursday morning too for Thursday morning meditation. Love hanging out with you guys on Thursday mornings. It's a different vibe. It's a different feel. We do a different gig. On Thursday mornings, we do scripture readings, we do prayer, and then we share a God story or a Holy Spirit shout out. So that is 7:30 a.m. If you want to join me this coming Thursday, I'd love to have you guys do that. Otherwise, of always, we've got Sunday coming. Sunday is a coming. And because we're a church about lifting lives, elevating Christ, a church for those who aren't here yet, make sure that as you come, the invitation is for you to come and bring someone with you. If you are on site or online, you can join us. If you're online, tag somebody, drop somebody a link, email it to somebody and invite them to church to join you from the comfort of your own home. You can do it in your jammies under the sheets and with your cup of coffee. Otherwise, join us on site as well Sunday morning and bring somebody there too. Meet someone there. The cafe is up and running, so you can tell them you'll buy them a cup of coffee when you get to church. You can grab a cup of coffee together. So have a wonderful night, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. Would love to see you on Thursday morning, and if not, we'll see you on Sunday. Thanks for being part of the C3 stream, Lifting Lives, Elevating Christ, a church for those who aren't here yet. And this is a stream talking Christ and Christ Church. So thanks, guys.